This time on Rad Rat Video, we're talking about the collectability of decks. Are your old skateboards ever going to be worth big bucks? Let's figure it out. Welcome back to Rad Rat Video, the channel where you can learn something new about skateboarding 3 times a week. Subscribe so every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday you can learn something about a new trick on the shred school. You can learn about one of your favorite pros. You can learn about skateboard video games. You can have your questions answered on Ask Rad Rat. And sometimes we do something a little bit different like today. So this was originally an Ask Rad Rat question, but I wanted to take a little bit more time and dive into it. So I wanted to promote it to its own video. This is from Emmanuel Ferrigno. And the question is basically, will modern decks ever be as collectible as the old ones? So if you look up Tony Hawk deck on eBay and you find like his first pro model from 1982 or whenever that was, you'll see him going for like $1,000 or more. You can find a signed Rodney Mullen board for $800, that kind of stuff. Some of those boards are really expensive and collectible these days. But will anything modern, will a Chad Muska board from 1998 ever be as valuable? And I think that there's, that's a really good question because the stuff from the 80s and the 70s even is really collectible because they're all different. You know, like a Tony Hawk Pro model is different from anyone's Pro model because it had its own shape. You know, all the shapes were different. The type of concave, the wheelbase stuff was a lot more experimental back then. And so if you get decks from your favorite pros and have them all lined up on your walls, they all look a lot different. They all have a lot more collectability from that kind of perspective. If you get into the 90s up to today, most boards are just popsicles with different names printed on them. So are those ever going to be as popular, especially considering how many that were made? You know, skateboarding was much more popular in 1999 than it was in 1984. So there's a million Chad Muska boards out there, or Jamie Thomas, or whoever. But are those going to be as collectible? And I think that's a good question, but I'm pretty sure that they will. We're going to dig into it a little bit more. But just from my experience on the channel, if I were to do a video about a pro from the 70s, I don't think it would do that well, because most of you guys who watch, most of you guys who are really into skateboarding and have found me because of that, most of you guys are in your 20s. There are a decent amount in your 30s, a few people in their 40s who will send me messages, but for the most part, people who are really, really into skateboarding are a bit younger. So most of us don't remember when Lance Mountain was the biggest pro on earth. And so if I were to make a video about him, I don't think it would do very well. If I were to make one about Chad Muska, again, I think that would do really well because there's something about what we can remember. And so decks from our time period are going to be valuable in some way, but is it ever going to reach what the 80s boards are right now? So let's take a look at that. I want to compare deck collecting because it's pretty new. Compare it to 2 other collecting things, coins and video games, and try to see what we can learn from those fields and see how that would apply to skateboarding. So the first thing I want to look at was coin collecting, and I think one of the big things we can learn from here is that the popularity of a collectible and the price of it is more related to how much people like it versus how rare it is. So if you're ever thinking about finding a rare antique, if you watch like the History Channel or something, how rare something is going to be really valuable. That's not always the case. Although sometimes it is. So I'll try to give you some examples. The first one I want to talk about is a 1932 quarter. For coin collectors, anything before 1933 is classic. Anything after is modern, at least by a lot of people's standards. So a 1932 quarter, really valuable. They didn't make a ton of them. The prices are pretty high. You can spend hundreds of dollars for one that you can barely read. But a 1934 quarter, not worth very much. No one really cares. If you get a little bit later, 1965 quarter is worth nothing. It's worth 25 cents. You'll find one in your change this week because they made 1 billion of them. A billion compared to like 10,000 a couple of decades before. So the amount that are available does make quite a big difference, but maybe not as much as you think. So here's my next example. This is called a trime. It's called that because it's like a dime, but it's worth 3 cents. They made these for a little while around the Civil War era because stamps cost 3 cents. So they thought it'd be really helpful to make a 3-cent coin. They weren't very successful or popular at the time. But the thing is, a lot of these are really, really rare. You can find one that they made like 10,000 of. But you know what? They're not that popular. If you go to a coin show and ask around for trimes, most dealers won't even have them. Nobody cares. They're not popular. No one likes them, although they're really rare and could be difficult to find. A lot of people like having difficulty for the sake of feeling like you really succeeded when you found one, but it's not popular. And why is that? I think the biggest reason in this case is because it's so tiny. It's hard to show you how small it is, but it's less than a third the size of a dime, 3 cents instead of 10. It was based on how much they weighed at the time. So it's like the size of your pinky nail. It's tiny, and you have to get out a magnifying glass to even read it. And so they're not that popular because of that. And so this kind of makes me think of like that obscure pro from the 90s had one pro model and then he disappeared. Maybe there's only 2 of those decks still available in good shape, but nobody cares. And so that's something important to think about if you are going to collect decks, you know, and especially if you're going to speculate and try to buy stuff because it'll be more valuable in the future. That's a big lesson to learn. Popularity is more important than how rare something is. And here's my second example. This is a Morgan silver dollar. This is by far the most popular collectible coin. You go to a show, you'll see thousands and thousands and thousands of them. But that's interesting because there's a ton of them. The U.S. government was really corrupt back in the day as well as now, but back then they had this law where they were legally required to buy silver from certain mines, and they had to make these coins just to use it up, but they never went anywhere. They just went into bank vaults. No one ever used these coins. But there's millions and millions and millions of them in uncirculated condition, just waiting for people they sold them all off later. That's the whole story. But the point is, there's a ton of these out there, but that kind of is what makes them popular, because they're available. You can try to find different sets. You can look for the best looking one possible and not just trying to find one in general, that kind of stuff. But it's popular in part because it's so big. It's like this big. You can move it around and it dances in the light. It's bright silver. It looks really nice. And you can find a lot that are in good shape. So, to me, that is sort of like a Tony Hawk deck or like Bam Margera or someone like that, someone who's really, really popular and had a ton of decks made. There's probably still a lot out there that are in good shape that you could buy these days. And those are going to still be popular because although there's more, people want a more supply and demand. There's a lot more demand to make up for that supply. So big name pros, people who we all know, household names in skateboarding, those decks are always going to have some kind of value, regardless of how rare they are. So if you do have an older deck by a big name pro, I would definitely hold on to that one. But the second thing I wanted to look at was video game collecting. And one of the things that makes it similar is that skateboarding and video gaming kind of started around the same time, you know, and so they've matured at the same rate. But skateboard collecting is still a bit newer. And I think that game collecting has been popular for a little while now, so we can learn a little bit about the way that that's developing. And the big thing that helps for skateboarding is that both games and skateboarding are both based more on what you remember, your own nostalgia for skateboarding. Coins are more about history. No one remembers, 1865, but you might want to collect a coin from there anyway. But gaming and skateboarding are both about your own personal experiences and memories. So let's take a little bit closer of a look at that. One of the hottest things in game collecting right now is the N64. It seems like, in general, as something turns about 20 years old, that's when it'll start to heat up, in general. So a few years back, N64, no one cared about. It was still just old instead of classic, There's kind of a fine line there. So as we move forward, stuff back here starts to get more and more popular. And I think in a few years, maybe 5-10 more years, PS2, PS3, that stuff is going to become classic and popular because it's from way back when I was a kid type of thing. And skateboarding is probably going to be pretty similar, but I don't know exactly what that time span is. Because you don't tend to, you play games when you're a tiny kid. You don't tend to start skateboarding until a little bit later. So that exact time amount might be slightly different. But roughly around 20 years, I think, is when you'll start to see classic stuff get to be more popular, more expensive. So if you want to buy boards from a little bit before that and hold on to them, I'm not going to tell you to speculate. If you want to make money, buy some stocks or something. But I do think that they will get to be more popular in some way. But there are a couple big differences between game collecting and deck collecting. First of all, how many decks can you buy? If I were to fill my office here, I might be able to fit, let's say 20 at the most, and that's like wall to wall, nothing but decks. Games, I could have 100 and put them in my bookshelf, no problem. So I think the quality is going to be a lot more important. If you have a limited amount of space, you're only going to buy the best. So you're going to buy your Tony Hawk and your Bam Margera. You're not going to buy just random stuff. The other big difference is you're not collecting sets for decks. You might buy a couple different decks from different brands, stuff that you liked, your favorite pro or something like that, but no one's going to go out and try to buy every flip deck and have like 150 different boards from all that time or something like that. I don't see that being the case. With coins, it is. You might want to buy every of this design, but every date along the way, something like that. But with decks, I don't see that being the case. So there are some differences there. It's hard to say exactly the way it'll go. The other big difference between skateboard collecting and anything else is that a lot fewer people are getting into the skateboard deck collecting. Like everyone played games as a kid. Everyone picked out state quarters from their change when they came out. But how many people, were a skateboarder but are also interested in collecting old decks as they get older? Not nearly as many. So because of that, it's going to be a little more unpredictable. You don't really know how things are going to go quite as well. But if I were to make a prediction, here's how I think it'll go. The big name decks, like the big name pros and the really classic graphics, those are going to be popular, and the prices go up when they reach around 20. And so that's how I think it's going to go. If you have an old Bam Margera deck, hold on to it, wait another few years, and I think that you could probably make some decent money off of it, but you never know for sure. I think deck collecting is pretty cool, but it's pretty new and it's hard to say exactly how it's going to go. If you were to spend big bucks on a Tony Hawk deck right now, I can't say for sure that market's still going to be there in the future. It's just too hard to say. But I do think deck collecting is going to continue to get more and more popular, and your old decks are going to be worth more and more money as time goes on. So those are my thoughts on that. Let me know what you think about that below in the comments. It's really tough to say. We're all just kind of guessing at this point, but I wanted to have as educated of a guess as I could. But until the next video, here's some more you can check out. I have lots of topics, different skateboarding things from all over the skateboarding world you can check out. And tap my logo on screen right there to subscribe, and that way you can keep learning new things about skateboarding 3 times a week. Thanks for watching.